Not too long ago, I had talked about something very similar to what we're seeing right now. So, in one of my previous videos, I had made mention of if you had actually looked back during Brexit, where the UK was leaving the EU, and negotiations weren't going, I guess, according to the EU's plans. And so, kind of in the middle of the negotiations was the variant news started to spring up, and it was the African variant. Now, if you had actually looked at what was going on in Africa, there was nothing going on in Africa, even to this day. Where, by comparison to other countries, Africa literally untouched, and scientists, scratching their head. Why? And it's really because they don't have really good testing, and where there's no testing, there's no C19. And so, of course, I have other, colleagues that are African descent, and they've either gone back home for a period during these past 16 months, or of course they're in contact with family members. And the overwhelmingly most of my colleagues have straightforwardly told me there's no such thing. There's nothing really going on out there. There's no people, no bodies in the streets, etc. And it's because really there's nothing to gain there. Africa is basically situated near China, and basically China for the longest has been working its way through Africa and many other countries under, I forget what they call it. I think it's like their bridge. It's like a bridge act. It's big bridge and road. I think what it's referred to. And it's their bridge and road initiative. And basically, it's kind of like how Rome basically spread its wings throughout the region. China very similarly is doing the exact same thing, where it's basically making these different deals with countries in the east, and basically indebting many of these nations. And when the nations can't pay, China basically works their way in and says, well, you give me your port, you give me this roadway, you give me these farms, etc. And that's basically what America has done for quite some time. They basically enslave nations. When these nations can't pay, well, then they give me a port here and there, give me access to rights to X, Y, and Z. And that's basically how things have worked for quite some time. One of the reasons why, like I've said for quite some time, America is literally the slaver of nations. The vast majority of people on the planet are slaves to America, or at the very least, I should say, slaves to houses. Right? One of my favorite shows, and maybe one of your favorite shows, is Game of Thrones. And in Game of Thrones, it was just basically, even though there were particular regions, but the real focus of Game of Thrones was based on houses or families. That's basically what we see today, which is why you see things like what this article talks about. UK excluded again from the EU's C19 safe travel list, but the US was added. And this is basically what happens when one country, and this is more of the premise of what you're witnessing, why some regions get banned. When there's, like you look in the UK, you look at the numbers don't exist. But the UK Prime Minister will say, well, we need to extend lockdowns for a bit longer. And the people are like, why? They're sitting there scratching their head like, we don't understand why. It doesn't show in the numbers. Nobody's getting sick. The hospitals aren't overflowing. Why are we still banning people, and why are we still forcing people to stay at home? And it's because it has nothing to do with the virus, but it has everything to do with the politics of what is going on between houses, which is why when you look in places like in America, and what you saw during like 2019, 18, and the beginning parts of 2020 during the election was more of political powers, political houses within America who are basically vying for power. And one is obviously stronger than the other, and the stronger one won out, which is why, even though, regardless of what the election numbers showed, no matter what was going to happen, they were going to have their way. And of course, the right is so weak that it really doesn't matter. And most right are actually middle left. And then what we have now is just far left. That is why you see socialist programs, Nazi communist style propaganda, because it's literally what we have in terms of the political atmosphere. And so there was a quote by Xi Jinping, right, the leader of China, where he had said in terms of why America couldn't get C-19 under control was because of democracy. And so he had said that his authoritarian way proved far superior, which is why they have supposedly no deaths and no outbreak or whatsoever. In my opinion, it actually looks more, especially when you look at, if you Google or YouTube, I should say, if you YouTube um, Wuhan pool party, right? Wuhan Brave pool party, whatever, something like that, and you'll see this huge pool party of literally thousands of Chinese people that are basically at a rave. And this was during the time period where America was basically at the height of deaths, right? Was basically at the height of deaths. And so this was kind of like the big middle finger to the West, saying, I know what you tried doing and it didn't work. Which is why, it's like I said, people imagine that everything, China is behind everything, and China is just a boogeyman that American Western elites want you to be fearful of. The real people you should be fearful of are them. That's why I said in my last video that I don't believe that the virus was released from China. I believe it has other origins, which is why this is basically what you're watching. So you see very similar things in terms of, which jab did you take? Did you take one that we deem authorized, as it says here? It says those who took, it says foreign tourists who have taken the AstraZeneca, it says, will not be allowed to watch the Springsteen's Broadway because it's not FDA approved. It goes on to say, it says Canadians fear other Broadway shows and U.S. revenues will follow suit. It says ban was revealed for the Springsteen on Broadway. It says the first show to open, it says, will affect Canadians and other foreign tourists who got the AstraZeneca jab. It says the AstraZeneca jab, of course, is not authorized by the FDA. And this came out, was it today? Yeah, this came out today, June 18th. And so it has nothing to do with the science. It has to do with, someone released Pandora's box and someone was looking to profiteer off of Pandora's box. And if you didn't take arsenic oil, well, then we don't deem you as immunized, right? And so this is basically the Game of Thrones. This is basically what is happening. This is basically the Game of Thrones that is going on within the West. And what is being utilized, or I should say weaponized, is which one did you take, right? Which goes to show, depending upon who deems who part of the alliance, which is why the EU agrees to lift travel ban on US tourists, while the UK has yet to make it onto the whitelist. And this is basically, like I said, when you start to look at these different articles, it paints a very different picture of not follow the science. I mean, you see these lawmakers have been exposed, and this one went to brunch with 10 people, 30 people. This one got caught doing X, Y, and Z, and then they just say, oh, we're sorry, and then they pretend to put their mask back on, and it's just all a game. It's just basically all a Game of Thrones, and of course, it's the average people who just don't understand what is going on. With that said, if you've been following recently within the U.S., right? So recently within the U.S., Biden's administration has talked about what looks like a Patriot Act, basically 2.0, or an extension of the Patriot Act. And basically, this is a very similar style of what went on in like Stalin and in Nazi Germany. Where basically it's basically a snitch program, very similar to what happened during C-19, during like the early parts of 19 and 20, where in America and in other countries where they were saying, well, if you see people doing X, Y, and Z, pick up the phone, call your local authorities so that they will deal with them, right? And in essence, it was basically a snitch program. And since people are now used to that, they refer to them as the Karens, etc. And so now, since people are basically used to this whole sort of style of snitching on their relatives, snitching on their neighbors, the administration takes it one step further, where it says they're fighting blind inside the Biden administration's uphill battle against the far right extremism. And if you read, there's a couple of different articles that talk about this. And basically what this is if you have right-wing family members that espouse things, related potentially to certain individuals, going back into positions of political authority, or if you say, we need to do X, Y, and Z, like what happened on the 6th, or if you maybe don't espouse the same sort of mentality of the insurrection that had taken place on the 6th, well, then you could be viewed as a far left extreme individual. And of course, they sort of kind of link it to terrorism, right? If you've noticed that they refer to what happened on the 6th being in regards to extremism, terrorism. Joe Biden on numerous occasions has talked about, CIA and all these different organizations say it's not, terrorism that is the real threat. It's white supremacy, right? As a white man basically leads a white organization. And if you actually look at the G7, there's literally not much diversity in the G7, as the vast majority of the people there are white. Most of the leaders there are white. And so the government basically utilizes very much sort of Nazi style way of leading. You basically get the people to police each other, right? So you get the left to police the right, you get the non-jab to police the jab, those who wore the mask to police the non-mask wearers, etc., right? And this is how you keep the plebs on the ground busy, while what goes on at the top is basically unseen. And that's why you wonder why all these different politicians, especially who claim to be on the right, just don't get it, right? You're like, the conversations that get had have nothing to do with the people and pursuing freedom and giving people back their freedom. That there's kind of like make fun of each other. But the reality is it's just elites vying for power against the masses. And this is what we're seeing within the country, but even more so when it comes to the West and the Western style of government, as is basically collapsing on itself. And it's basically like a last ditch effort to hold on to a dying way of ruling, instead of allowing people to have their freedom and letting freedom dictate the direction that people go. We are basically falling back on old school totalitarianism, a very far left Nazi style way of ruling individuals. And that's why you see this really big push, let's offer money, etc., for people to take the jab, because it's all related to control.